Hey listeners, thanks for dropping in. I'm Christy.
And I'm Melissa. And this is Buried Motives, where we dig deep into the details of some of the most gruesome
dirtbag murderers. Hey listeners.
Welcome back to Buried Motives.
We are so excited that you're joining us today.
We are in the thick of spooky season. And have I got a case for you, Christy?
I'm so excited. I'm in my glory, by the way, listeners. I love spooky season.
Have you ever had a spooky dream?
Of course.
Have you ever had one so vivid that when you wake up, it's hard to convince yourself it was just a dream?
Oh, totally. And I've had some that have been so visual for me that I still can reflect back and see images from that dream, even back from when I was a teenager.
Those are the scariest dreams. I hate those. Today, we're going to talk about a dream. Dreams are even more freaky when they take on the air of premonition, that something is going to happen or is going to be unearthed. Do you remember my last case?
Deborah?
Yes. She had claimed to have a dream about where her missing husband was. It wasn't so much of a premonition, though, because it turned out she was using the dream as a ruse to tell her daughters where she had hidden his body after murdering him.
Right.
Well, the case I'm researching for today also has a premonition dream in it. And it is definitely creepy enough for this season, especially since all of this happened in the 1820s when people were very superstitious. Can you tell I'm super excited to tell you this case?
Yes, I'm so excited to hear it. Because it sounds like this dream was actually a premonition.
It was. So freaky how that happens. Do you think people are more or less superstitious now than they were back then?
That's a really good question. I think more back then. And I think that's where you get all the old wives' tales, quote unquote. But I do definitely think a lot of people are still superstitious today.
That's what I was thinking too. Definitely has to be less now. But then when I actually started thinking about it, there's quite a few superstitions that we still have that are kicking around.
100%. And even just repeated rituals that maybe a sports player does right before he or she starts a game.
Right. So I'm not sure we are actually less superstitious than they were back then. But they definitely believed in the supernatural a lot more, I think. Maybe.
Oh, I think we still believe in that. You might not, but I definitely do.
Christy and I are on two opposite sides of the fence when it comes to that.
Oh, it's 100% real.
Listeners, you can chime in and take a side. I'm guessing the majority of you will side with Christy.
Especially after the case I'm going to tell you next week.
Oh. Well, the case we're going to talk about today is about a person that had a dream. In this case, Anne Marten was the second wife of Thomas Marten, and she was having repetitive dreams about her oldest stepdaughter, Maria's death.
Oh.
Anne had married Thomas, 25 years her senior, a little over a year after his first wife, Grace, had passed away. At the age of 20, she had become the mother overnight to Thomas's 5 children, a son and 4 daughters.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
But that's what they did back then. You needed that wife to take care of your brood of children.
It's so true. It just kind of happened that way. Maria, it sounds like, had always been a thorn in Anne's side. She was the oldest of the girls, and at the time of the marriage, she was just 11. Before her mother's death, Maria was described as being a quiet and an intelligent child. As a child, at the age of 7, she had begun to earn a living doing domestic work and helping in a nursery in Lamb. Her earnings were used to help support the family, who got by on very little.
That is crazy.
Yeah. Her father was a farm laborer and had a good reputation as a worker, but his wages just didn't cut it as a mole catcher. There wasn't much to go around for the family, and so the children were sent out to work.
But age 7, that blows my mind. I know that probably happened a lot back then. Maybe, I don't know. But 7, she's just a baby.
Yeah, it does seem like an odd thing to us nowadays, but back then it actually happened quite a bit. You just did what you needed to survive.
Well, anybody with a first grader or second grader, you tell them they better be extra good or you're going to send them to work.
Send them out to toe the line.
That's right.
Working outside the home kind of set Maria up so that when her mother Grace died, just a few months shy of her 10th birthday, she took on all the household chores for the family in the tiny cottage in Polstead in the UK. The cooking, the cleaning, and caring for her siblings, she just did it all. And apparently she did it very well. Well enough that she was well respected and admired among her neighbors.
Wow. So she didn't really have a childhood.
No, she didn't. She just took on this new role. But then her father remarried, and Anne stepped in to be the woman of the house and the one in charge in 1812 when she was just 11. There are differing reports, which I don't think is a huge shocker considering the length of time it's been since this case. But Maria's attitude changed quite dramatically during her teenage years after her father's remarriage.
Ooh. She probably felt that not only was her mother being replaced, but that her role was as well.
Yeah, I think that would be a normal conclusion for a child to come to.
Yeah.
But she did go from this quiet, industrious child to what her stepmother described as being frivolous and a pleasure-seeking woman.
At age 11?
It was into her teenage years.
Oh, okay.
Anne, who was not much older than her stepdaughter, described Maria in her teenage years as dressing, quote, a little fine, and was not shy about the fact that this caused contention in the home.
Ooh, she must have showed her ankles.
Yeah, she might have. Maybe a little bit of neck bone.
Scandalous.
Maria was considered a good-looking girl in the small community, and as she matured, she found she liked the company of men, whom she had no trouble attracting, even without a full set of teeth. She was missing a tooth from both her upper and her lower jaw. They didn't have dentists, so to be missing a couple of teeth wasn't that odd.
Oh, no, not at all.
No. And maybe she was so popular because she was providing other sources of entertainment for these gentlemen. At the age of 17, Maria became involved with Thomas Corder, the second son of a middle-class family of tenant farmers in Polstead. So they were a little bit higher class than she was. The relationship was kept hush-hush at Thomas's request for fear of what his parents would think of him dating someone of lower status. Despite being asked to be kept in the shadows, Maria believed that Thomas was courting her honorably.
So we have another Thomas in the picture.
You're right. This is the second Thomas in this case. And this honorable courting led Maria to becoming pregnant with her first child.
Ooh.
The baby was born in 1822 and named Matilda. Maria was dealt a rotten hand by Thomas as he broke off their involvement pretty soon after the baby was born because he didn't want the financial responsibility.
Oh, what a dirtbag.
Yeah. And this was followed very soon after that by the death of her child, who was sickly at birth.
Oh, no.
So it was a rough hand. The couple's involvement was permanently cut off when Thomas drowned accidentally just a short time later.
Accidentally, for sure? She wasn't seeking revenge?
All reports are that it was accidentally. He fell through the ice.
Okay.
But the heartbreak over the loss of her lover and child didn't seem to impact Maria's judgment or behavior for very long. Not long after, she had an affair with another man, Peter Matthews, and gave birth to her second child in December of 1824, a little boy she named Thomas Henry after her father. Peter was a little bit more of a stand-up guy than Thomas had been, and while he didn't marry Maria, he did provide £5 quarterly for the care of his son, which at the time, it was a decent amount.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually set out by law that if you had an illegitimate child, you had to pay their upkeep or else it fell onto the parish to pay for that child.
Okay, so women weren't left without support.
They weren't supposed to be left destitute. But there was also some severe repercussions for women that had illegitimate children, and we're going to get into that. But the £5 quarterly was a decent sum when compared to what her dad Thomas was making as a mole catcher on the farm. Having a child to care for, again, did not slow Maria down, though, nor did her growing reputation. Or I was thinking maybe having a child to care for and her growing reputation made her a little bit more desperate to find a husband. And maybe that's what explains her next actions. Because what's a girl to do in a small farming community for entertainment or to secure a husband? The village of Polstead wasn't an overly exciting place to live in the 1820s. There weren't a lot of comings and goings. It was tiny, and the parish survived mainly on its agricultural roots. It wasn't really known for anything in particular, but that would all change when Maria took up with William Corder. In the small town where everyone knows everyone, the dating pool can be a little shallow. So in March of 1826, Maria began having a relationship with Thomas's younger brother, William.
Oh, Thomas the first guy?
Yes.
Okay.
William, like his brother, knew that his relationship with Maria wouldn't be looked upon too kindly by his mother. So the two took to meeting in a barn that the Corder family owned on the outskirts of town.
Oh, so really rolling in the hay.
Yes. And I'm not sure if this is the same barn that would become later known as the Red Barn from Anne's Dreams, but the whole red light district vibe was definitely what was going on there. It was the kind of activities that William's family would not approve of.
They took it to the barn.
Yeah. William's family was described as respectable, and it sounded like they were bent on keeping it that way. William was 3 years younger than Maria, being born to John and Mary Corder on June 21st, 1804. He was the second youngest in the family and was described by other students as being not a popular kid because he had a reputation for being dishonest and crafty. He'd actually earned the nickname Foxy because of his lying.
Oh, swiper no swiping.
Yes. He was said to, quote, indulge in petty deceits. It sounded like he was a little bit of a swindler. He would borrow money from his father's friends, and at times he would actually sell off his father's stock without telling him about it.
Oh.
Yeah. Also, he could impress his acquaintances and the ladies with his fortunes.
And we're talking livestock.
Yeah, he was selling off pigs.
Okay.
They weren't dabbling in the financial markets. This was a trait that he would continue into his teenage years, and it was not looked upon too kindly by his strict father. When John got fed up with paying to cover up his son's indiscretions and paying off his debts, he tried to send him off to sea. But every ship that he tried to send him on rejected him because William didn't have the greatest eyesight. It sounded like he was a little farsighted.
Oh.
William returned again to work in the farm with his father, and that didn't go very well. So he headed off to London and took up with another local thief. His friend would eventually be picked up by the authorities and transported for life to the colonies. But William escaped this particular crime that had resulted in his friend being shipped off, and so he escaped.
He's like a little bandit.
Yeah, things seemed to work out for him. It sounded like he was just this young, wild son of a family that could provide for him and enable him to do that because all of his other brothers were taking on all the responsibilities of running the farm alongside with their father, and so he was just able to get away with things and slack off. That's the impression I got from him from journal entries.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. All of that was until tragedy struck his family. Like I said, his brother Thomas had died shortly after abandoning Maria, and his death was followed quickly by his father John. And then, not long after their untimely deaths, his brothers James and John became ill with consumption or tuberculosis.
Holy cow.
Yeah, their family really ran into some tough luck. All of them became unable to oversee the farm the way that they had before, and their deaths would soon follow, all within the span of 18 months.
Holy. So now is William left in charge of the farm?
He is. And all the fortunes.
Oh, no.
That's it exactly. During this time, all of the family's wealth and holdings fell to William, who, at the beginning part of 1826, put on a good front of being a man in charge that was willing and capable of taking on the role of head of the family. The workers he oversaw described him as being good-natured and easy to get along with.
Hey.
But old habits die hard for playboys. Despite trying to pull off the respectable head of the family farmer, William continued his secret relationship with Maria. When Maria became pregnant again, it's not a shocker that William's mother would not have been overly pleased. So while promising her family that he would marry Maria and take care of her, William arranged for an apartment in Plough Lane, Sudbury for Maria's lying-in period to keep her pregnancy hidden from his mother. He promised Maria that he would pay the £5 quarterly for the upkeep of their child until they were properly married.
Hey, but he's going to keep her hidden from the world.
That's right.
Doesn't sound promising. Red flag, ladies.
Yeah. You don't want to start off a relationship like that.
No. And how come these boys can't stand up to their mom?
Don't know. She must have been a force to be reckoned with, I'm sure.
I think so.
Yeah. While staying at this apartment, the landlord of the apartment said that the two were amicable when he saw them together, and that William came to visit Maria once or twice a week and treated her with kindness. His opinions weren't so high of Maria, who he reported to be generally in bad spirits.
So she was cranky.
Yeah.
She's pregnant and abandoned. What do you expect?
Yeah, that's what I thought too. I did find it interesting that she knew enough to negotiate, though, that you are going to pay for this child until we are legally married.
Absolutely. And it also speaks to the time of where the man would say, well, she's not very nice. She's not very friendly. She'll never have a smile on her face.
Yeah.
Because that's just what women were expected to be like.
That's right.
Pregnant and barefoot and smiling all the way.
Unfortunately, that was the time. The child was born at the apartment, and shortly after, the couple left on April 16th, 1827, with Maria returning home to her father and Anne's house with yet another child born out of wedlock.
Ooh, they didn't even know about it until then?
It sounds like they knew about it. They knew where their daughter was. They actually had a fairly close relationship, or at least Anne was keeping tabs on where her stepdaughter was.
Hey.
Not only a very disgraceful predicament and a costly one for the Fore family, but also one that was apparently illegal at the time.
What?
Yes. In 1820s United Kingdom, unmarried coupling and childbearing were the cause for arrest.
Really?
Yes.
So you really had to put a ring on it.
That's right. So the whole reason why all of these pregnancies were kept so hush-hush from authorities was because it was illegal. That didn't mean that the local town gossips, though, didn't know exactly what was going on.
That's one way to get a guy to marry you.
Mm-hmm. William's baby with Maria, unfortunately, was just like his brothers and was sickly. And it is believed to have died within 2 weeks of returning to the Martins' homestead.
Oh, no.
Yeah. William and Maria told Anne that they had buried the child in the field in Sudbury, but there were no official records of them ever doing this. Perhaps that was because of the secrecy surrounding the child's birth. Nobody wanted to be arrested. Or maybe there were more nefarious purposes.
Either way, that's awful.
It is awful. After this child died, William, though, did continue to visit Maria and continued to promise that he would marry her. But he stalled again and again. And this had me wondering, where the heck is the shotgun wedding? I am sure Maria's father Thomas and Anne had a lot to say about William and Maria's behavior, but his objections were not raised publicly, probably because he was too afraid of ruining the potential chance at a marriage for his daughter, especially since William was better off financially, and his daughter didn't have now suitors lined up like she had before because of her growing reputation.
And she has a child already.
Right. Plus, he's already struggling to feed her and her first illegitimate child. They were probably hoping William would take Maria off their hands. So I think that kind of explains why the events that happened next didn't raise a lot of suspicions with them at first. In May of 1827, the supposedly engaged couple were less than happy with each other. Maria's father was pushing for marriage, and William's mother was pushing against one. For her, it would not have done for her baby to marry anyone beneath him, or someone with such poor moral character.
Oh,
Yeah.
honey, your son was part of that moral character.
It was all put off on the woman. William and Maria, though, were often heard arguing about marriage and a mysterious 5-pound debt. William wanted for the pair to elope out of fear of being arrested if someone were to discover that they had had a child together. And it seems that Maria wasn't too happy about this. It would mean that she would have to leave her son behind for a time for them to go and elope. And by this point, maybe the girl just wants a wedding with her family present.
True.
Right? She just wants it all.
And she should be allowed to have that.
Mm-hmm. But that wasn't the case. And either way, she wasn't really on board with this plan for eloping. And it was well known amongst her family that she wasn't overly excited about it.
So she actually had boundaries and wasn't just trying to find the first guy to marry her.
Right.
Go Maria.
Yeah. It sounded like she was a little bit of a firecracker. In May, William came to the house and told Maria in front of her stepmother Anne that there were rumors of the parish constable coming to arrest her and proposed that they should flee to Ipswich to get legally married. Maria, like I said, was pretty feisty and fired back at William that if I go to jail, you go too.
Ooh.
Yeah.
This is an odd dynamic. Because you would think you'd be like, okay, honey, let's go. Like, we just want to be married and we don't want to go to jail.
That's right. But she wanted to do it on her terms.
Wow.
By reminding him that their situation wasn't just her fault and that she wasn't the only one in trouble, she was making it pretty clear to him that she wasn't about to take the fall for him. The pair did finally agree that the best plan would be for them to elope, and they settled on Sunday, May 13th, as the day that they would flee to Ipswich to have the necessary banns read for their wedding. All of this was discussed freely in front of Anne. The Sunday came, and William took Maria to his mother's house to stay until they would leave for Ipswich the next day. Then, at 3 a.m. the next morning, Maria was back at her father's house, still unmarried.
What?
Yes.
This is some drama.
No. Could you imagine the turmoil of going back and forth? Yes, we're getting married. No, we're not. We're going to be arrested. We're going to hide. There would have been so much drama going on. And I don't know if it was his mother had talked him out of it and said, no, you're not doing this, and shipped the girl back to her own house. Or at the same time that all this was going on, one of William's brothers was really, really sick. He was actually on his deathbed. And so maybe they were like, we shouldn't do this right now. But either way, the two weren't married that day. They planned again to leave on the Wednesday and then again on the Thursday because their plans just continually kept falling through. Then Friday, May 18th, 1827 came. William arrived around 11 a.m. in a huff, demanding that Maria pack her things now. Today was the day. They were not going to put off getting married any longer. He told her that there was a warrant out for her arrest and that they needed to flee immediately. The parish constable was on his way to arrest her for her repeated offenses that she had committed with her illegitimate children and the burden that they were on the parish funds. They agreed that Maria would dress in men's clothing to disguise herself and that William would take her belongings to the Red Barn located less than a mile from her home, and then he would return for her. The barn was a popular landmark in the countryside, and it had gained its nickname from the red hue that it would take on at sunset. Because of the glow, it was often acquainted with the supernatural.
Okay.
It sounded like this was the barn that they used to sneak off to, too.
It was the barn.
Yeah, the Red Barn.
The Red Barn to roll in the hay. Melissa, this could be a movie.
Well, it has been.
Oh, has it?
Yeah.
Like, this would make a fantastic movie.
And plays and books.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can see why.
So off William went to drop her clothes off at the Red Barn, and then he returned 15 minutes later, and the two departed the house through separate doors so that they wouldn't be seen leaving together, and made their way alone to the Barnfield Hill, where the barn was located. With Maria dressed in men's clothing over her petticoats, William's green handkerchief around her face and neck, and her earrings and hair combs hidden under a man's hat.
Okay.
According to Anne, both she and Maria were very emotional when Maria left. Anne was upset that William had waited so long to take Maria as his wife. She had wanted the two to get married before the baby was born, and she felt that had they just done this, then there would have been no need for the couple to be fleeing in secrecy now. She's like, you could have taken care of all of this before.
Right.
William assured her as they left that he would see to it that the two were legally married. Don't worry about it. I'm going to take care of this.
But at this point, how does the police even have proof that they had a baby together?
They don't. Because they didn't bury the child in any cemetery. There's no record of the child's burial. The only proof that the police would have were the landlord from the building where she stayed and actually delivered the baby.
Right. But it's just a they said, we said type of situation then.
That's right. But the two flee to the barn to get set to elope. That was the last time Thomas or Anne saw Maria. She left with William, and she'd never returned after their marriage. For Thomas and Anne, it should have been a relief that William had finally made good on his promise to marry Maria. She was properly settled and protected by the name of a good gentleman, and eventually, when the couple were settled, they could take over the care of young Thomas.
So they actually did get married. Or they're just thinking they got married. I'm thinking they didn't get married. I don't think she left the barn.
You're thinking on the right track.
Okay.
Because Anne kept having this nagging feeling that something about this situation was just not right. Maria, unlike most young women in her position, was able to read and write. So Anne found it very peculiar that she never wrote the family after she left with William. When William had told them that the couple had run into some troubles getting a marriage license and that they would have to wait several weeks to get one in London, the family didn't expect to see Maria, but they did expect her to write because they knew she wouldn't come back to the area because there was an arrest warrant out for her.
Right.
Or that's what they're thinking. They were content with the story that William told them about him settling his bride-to-be with some relatives in Yarmouth. But it was still odd that she hadn't written, not even to inquire about her son, who she was very maternal with. The Martens continued to see William frequently following the couple's departure. as he tended to his family's farm and attended his brother's funeral. When he saw the Martens, he would keep them updated on Maria's welfare and the status of their impending nuptials. At his brother's funeral, Anne thought she had seen him with Maria's umbrella and had hoped that Maria had accompanied him. She got all excited that, oh, there's Maria's umbrella. She must be around somewhere.
Yeah.
But he just told her, no, she was mistaken, that this really wasn't Maria's umbrella. When Maria's family had offered to send him with some of Maria's clothes when he returned to see her again, he declined, saying that she had enough things, she didn't need any more. Again, this is odd because she loved her clothes. That had always been Anne's criticism of her.
Right. She's this little fashionista.
That's right. But I think at the same time, it would have been easy to assume that this just meant that William was taking good care of her, that she had all she needed. She didn't need anything from her old life. William also provided a plausible explanation for Maria's younger brother, George, thinking he had saw him in the field several hours after the couple's supposed departure, carrying a pickaxe.
Oh, no.
Yeah. William denied that it was him, saying that the young boy had obviously just mistaken him for a farmhand that he had working in the field at the time stubbing trees. That seems believable.
Nope.
Not to Christy. At harvest time, William oversaw the corn laid down in the red barn, fielding questions about Maria the whole time.
This has been months now.
Oh, yeah. By now, the rumor mill was just buzzing about the couple that had supposedly eloped. Because she had been pregnant and then there was no baby. Now they were supposed to elope, but now there's no Maria.
Oh, it's not looking good.
No. And people in the town are recognizing this.
Yeah.
When a neighbor, Mrs. Phoebe Stowe, asked him about his new wife, William assured her that Maria was well and did not live very far away, despite him telling several other people almost the exact opposite thing, that she was staying with relatives in Yarmouth.
Well, I'm not understanding. If everybody knows that they're married, why can't she just live with him?
Because they're not married yet. He says they're waiting for the license to go through and they have to travel to London to get the proper license. They couldn't just go through with reading the banns like everybody else.
Yeah, hogwash.
They're all buying it though. Anyway, this Mrs. Stowe, she asked if Maria was likely to have any more children now that they were getting married. And William tells her, no, she's not. Maria Marten will have no more children. The neighbor was a little put off by this and she said, well, why not? She's still a young woman. And William told her, quote, believe me, she will have no more. She has had her number. This sounded odd to this neighbor, so she asked William where his wife was. And he said, quote, she is not far from us. I can go see her whenever I like. And I know that when I am not with her, nobody else is.
Because she's buried close by.
Yeah.
That's what he means, that he can go see her.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
This was a very unusual thing to say and fanned more gossip around the small community. Enough that after the harvest was collected and safely stowed away in the red barn, William claimed that his health was declining and that he needed to get away to a sunnier climate for his health.
This guy's terrible.
It is a little bit strange.
This is really creepy. Just thinking of him walking around the farm and she's buried somewhere there.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
So he departs posted. William sold off his portions of his father's estate for £1,250, or about £165,000 today.
Ooh, so that's almost like double for Canadian.
Yeah, it was a pretty good sum.
Yeah.
And he got out of Dodge. With the proceeds from the estate and those he had gained from his brother's recent deaths, he was definitely now a person of means. Around October 19th, Thomas received a letter from William that he had been waiting for. It read, quote, Thomas Marten, I am just arrived in London upon business respecting our family affairs, and am writing to you before I take the least refreshment, because I shall be in time for the night's post, as my stay in town will be very short, anxious to return again to her who is now my wife, and with whom I shall be one of the happiest men. The letter had arrived from the Bull Inn in London and seemed to check out with the stories that William had been telling them previously about the couple's plans to marry.
So they think she's with him in London getting married.
They think that she is now married. He's sending them word that the deed is done. In this letter, William also wrote that he was surprised that the family had not answered any of Maria's previous letters and had not attended the wedding. William had told them that they had made do without the family. A friend who Maria had been staying with had stepped in as her father figure during the wedding ceremony.
Oh, what a terrible letter to receive.
Yeah. William addressed the care of Maria's son Henry and asked the Martens to continue to take care of him a little while longer so that they could get their farm set up. In this letter, William reminded Thomas that the child's father was continuing to provide funds for his care, and once they took the child, the family wouldn't have those funds anymore. In their correspondence back and forth after this letter, Thomas expressed his outrage that Maria's letter had somehow been lost by the post, and he agreed that it would be fine to keep caring for Maria's young son and to not alert the child's father that Maria was now married. That way, the payments could still be received by the Martens.
Wow.
Yeah.
He is a little fox.
He is, isn't he? William also wrote to Peter Matthews, Henry's father, on November 19th and told him that Maria and he had not yet been married and that his monthly payment and upkeep for his son would still be appreciated. William and Peter also shared numerous correspondence back and forth during this time about a missing £5 note that had previously gone missing from one of Peter's letters to Maria the previous year. And I wonder if this was the debt that Maria and William had often quarreled about, because she was overheard to accuse William of stealing right out of her child's mouth.
Oh, he probably did. Dirty little dog.
Yeah. It didn't seem, though, to faze him at all to lie and steal from anyone. He didn't even seem too concerned about keeping his dates or stories straight, because he told the father that they were married mid-October, and he's telling this guy that they're still not married in mid-November.
Right.
He's not even keeping timelines straight. But I'm guessing that he just assumed that nobody would be comparing notes.
Right. And he wanted to make sure that he wasn't on the bill for paying for this child.
Right. But others were paying attention, and his stories of Maria being either too ill to write or having an injured hand that didn't allow her to write just didn't ring true. To Maria's family, especially Anne, all of the oddities in William's stories just kept adding up. And then there were the dreams that Anne kept having. Disturbing, frightful dreams of Maria's ghost appearing to her and telling her that she had been murdered. The dreams revealed vivid images of the condition of Maria's body and exactly where it was buried in the Red Barn.
No way.
Yes. Having just finished researching my other case as I was preparing this one, I have to admit for a little while, I was like, oh, Anne, you have something to do with it. You've always had a tiff with your stepdaughter. How do you know all of this information had you not participated in some way?
Because Maria's ghost has come to visit her. It's true. I already believe it.
But honestly, if she had not had some sort of participation in it, she knew exactly every detail. How else would she know? Was it just her suspicion of William that had her imagination running wild, and so she was having these dreams? Did she really just have really good deductive reasoning and saw straight through all of his lies? Or was she really being haunted by Maria's ghost?
Well, I really hope she didn't have anything to do with it. So I'm going for option C. I hope she was just being haunted by Maria's ghost.
It does sound like that. The dreams began shortly before Christmas in 1827, and they didn't stop. At first, Anne paid little attention to the dreams. It didn't sound like she was an overly superstitious woman. But then, perhaps because of the subconscious thoughts they were producing, she began to view William's actions and Maria's absence with more and more suspicion. By April of the following year, the dreams had nagged her enough until she convinced her husband to go check the barn, telling him, quote, I think, were I in your place, I would go and examine the Red Barn. I have very frequently dreamed about Maria, and twice before Christmas I dreamed that Maria was murdered and buried in the Red Barn.
Okay, so if she had something to do with it, she's not going to send someone to unearth the body. Also, Maria was last seen leaving with William.
Mm-hmm.
William didn't say, hey, she's missing. Where did she go? There's no way that Anne's involved.
No. So the only plausible explanation is that she actually saw her ghost, which
Definitely.
is just so freaky to me.
It's actually awesome because from how you described Maria, she was this firecracker. And so she was not going to take it even in her death.
No.
She's like, no way, sir. I'm making sure you get caught.
And it was because of this dream that justice is brought about for her. Because on April 19th, after gaining permission, Thomas entered the barn to soothe Anne's concerns. He entered the grain storage area as Anne instructed him to do, because that's where she had seen the body in her dream.
Oh, she knew specifically where.
She knew exactly where. And that's what I mean. How could she not have had something to do with this person's death? She knows specifics. He began to use his mole spade to poke holes into the floor. With the sharp metal tool that was originally designed to kill moles, he was able to feel an area of the ground around some rocks that was actually softer than the rest of it. This is where he started to dig. And this is where he found his daughter's badly decomposed body, doubled over, laying on its side.
Oh, Melissa.
Yeah, exactly where Anne had said it would be.
My goodness. How horrific for Thomas to find his baby girl like that.
Yeah. Without digging very much further, they were already certain that the body was 26-year-old Maria. The shawl that was in the ground was the one that she had been wearing the day she left. Her earrings and combs also gave her away, along with William's green handkerchief still tied tightly around her neck. What authorities there were in 1827 were called to the site to assist the removal of Maria's body. Before it was taken from the ground, the local surgeon made notes about the condition of the body, and her family provided further identification. They were sure it was Maria because the remains were showing the missing front teeth and a large wen around the neck that was just like what Maria had.
What is that?
A wen?
Yeah.
Oh, it's like kind of like a double chin or even like a cyst on the neck.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I've just never heard it called a wen.
That's what they called it way back then.
Wen.
Yeah. Her body was moved to the local pub for closer examination by a surgeon. They found that the body contained inflammation on the one side that was again consistent with a medical condition that Maria had. The surgeon concluded that Maria had been shot through the left side of her face. The bullet had passed through the right eye socket, leaving behind a 4-inch deep path. But he wasn't convinced that this shot would have been fatal. While he couldn't conclude conclusively how she had died, he did conclude that her death was due to violence. So when they held the inquest the next day, the family didn't take long to point fingers at William.
For sure.
Maria's younger sister pointed out to authorities that she had seen William with his gun the day he had come to collect Maria. While Maria's body was buried in Polstead with hundreds of people attending her funeral, not bad for someone with a poorer reputation prior to her death, a constable was sent to track down William, and it didn't take very long because William had given very little thought to go into hiding. Not long after leaving Polstead, William had placed an advertisement in the Morning Herald and the Sunday Times in November of 1827. The advertisement read, quote, "Matrimony, a private gentleman, aged 24, entirely independent, whose disposition is not to be exceeded, has lately lost the chief of his family by the hand of Providence, which has occasioned discord among the remainder under circumstances most disagreeable to relate. To any female of respectability who would study for domestic comfort and willingly confide her future happiness in one very qualified to render the marriage state desirable, as the advertiser is in affluence, the lady must have some power of some property through means similar to this now resorted to, and it is hoped that no one will answer this through impertinent curiosity. But should this meet the eye of any agreeable lady who feels desirous of meeting with a sociable, tender, kind, and sympathetic companion, they will find this advertisement worthy of notice. Honor and secrecy may be relied on."
What?
He advertised for a wife.
What? He didn't want to marry Maria, and now he's looking for a wife. And he forgot to say, oh, also I might murder you and bury you in my barn.
Right.
What a creep! It's like murdering someone and then going on Tinder the next day.
95 women replied to this offer.
What?
Yes.
95.
95. William only picked up 45 of the letters that were sent in respect to this first advertisement, and he never called for those that actually answered the one in the Sunday Times. That's because among the first 45, he found a woman to his liking, Miss Mary Moore, a lady whom he had already known from church.
What?
Shortly afterwards, a week, they were married at St. Andrew's Church, and then they went on to run a school for girls called Everly Grove out of their home in Brentford. By this time, he had gone through his considerable inheritance and was relying on his old habit of forgery to pay the bills.
Get out.
Yeah.
Melissa, this isn't real.
This is what he did.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, there's no even question of who was solely responsible for what happened. And that's why in his little ad, he wanted to make sure she was a woman of substance who had land.
Yep.
Wow.
On April 28th, around 10 a.m., a constable knocked on the door of William's house and began to ask questions about Maria Marten. William pretended not to know who the constable was even speaking of.
What?
3 times he asked if he knew a Maria, and 3 times William denied it.
What? Yeah. You know what I want to say. What a turd.
Uh-huh. His denials wouldn't stop him from being arrested, though, but they would allow him to finish his breakfast before they carted him off to jail because he was being so gentlemanly with them.
Well, he's going to need his protein to get him through the day.
Yeah. When the constables searched his house, they found a velvet bag that belonged to Maria with 2 pistols inside of it that matched the caliber of bullet that would have created the hole in her skull.
And I can't believe he got married after a week.
Yeah.
After all that rigmarole to try and marry Maria.
He meant business this time.
And how horrible for his new wife.
Yes.
Realize you married a dirtbag.
Oh, she stands by him.
Really?
She has a hard time believing that he could actually do this.
Well, she did know him for a whole week, Melissa, before they got married.
Right?
Oh, crazy.
No, what happens next is even more crazy.
Okay.
So the case goes to the prosecutor, or the lawyer that's going to try William for murder. And it sounds like he wasn't feeling overly confident in his chances. So he actually had Maria's body exhumed on May 16th for himself to act as the coroner and examine her body again. Using the information that police had found a sword in William's house when they had searched it, he looked at the body again. While examining her body this time, the prosecutor/coroner found stab wounds that were determined to be fatal. One was found on the left side of the body between the 4th and 6th ribs that was about 6 inches deep. Another was found on the right side of the neck, and another 4-inch sword slash was found on the right side of her face.
How did they miss this the first time?
Well, that's a good question. But this prosecutor-coroner found it this time. So when they took William to court, they held him on trial for 10 counts of murder.
10 counts of murder?
For every wound that they felt she had that would have possibly been fatal.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
So it was like he killed her 10 times.
Yes. So he got charged with 10 counts of murder.
Why do I low-key love that?
It is pretty awesome. But I think it's also a clear reflection of the attention that the murder was drawing from the community. For whatever reason, the trial drew considerable crowds from all over. This was the dawning era of newspapers, and reporters flocked from all over nearby towns and even from London to cover the inquest and the trial. Preachers gathered with huge crowds outside the barn to deliver sermons on moral conduct. Folk songs and various impromptu plays depicting the murder began springing up everywhere because of the scandal that surrounded the crime and because it piqued people's interest so much.
See, true crime fans stem right back to the 1800s.
It's so true. William's mother actually threatened playwrights for using her son's name and had to remind them that he had not yet been found guilty. But it did little to dissuade the use of Corder the murderer. William's wife, Mary, stood by him, and she visited him almost daily and did not ever waver in her belief of his innocence. The trial began on August 7th, 1828, in the Shire Hall of Bury St. Edmunds. So this is all happening fairly quickly.
Mm-hmm.
People came from all over and lined up in the pouring rain at 5 a.m. just to stand outside to get a seat 4 hours before the court opened.
Whoa.
The crowd grew so large that spectators who wished to view the trial had to be chosen by a ticket. Women who were not allowed in court proceedings at the time pressed on the windows so closely trying to hear what was going on that they actually broke some of the window panes.
Good for them.
Women are all about true crime.
You can't keep us out.
No. Crowds of women actually gathered on the rooftop trying to hear the proceedings, and their combined weight threatened to collapse the roof.
No way!
So eventually the rules were bent and they allowed women to enter the court because they were so persistent on hearing this case.
That is wild. I'm envisioning them just swarming this courthouse.
Yeah.
Literally from top to bottom.
Mm-hmm. When the jurors were brought in, it took over an hour to get them just through the crowds of people outside. And when they actually did get into the building, some of them were missing shoes and their coats were torn because they had to push their way through the crowds. There was even one court official that had lost their wig in the mayhem.
Oh my goodness, Melissa.
It just sounds like it was crazy. William pleaded not guilty to the charges against him. For the most part of the trial, William smiled and was described as having an air of indifference. His manner was collected and his complexion fresh, and he looked around him at times with seeming cheerfulness. That's how he was described.
Ew.
There were certain points that he did appear pale and looked like he was going to faint, but those emotions were not the norm while he stood in front of the jury. The evidence was overwhelming against William, even without the dream being used at all. I mean, how could it be? You can't admit that as evidence. But,
well, maybe in the 1800s you could.
Yeah, maybe. But it wasn't brought in. It wasn't part of the court case. The neighbor Phoebe, who had previously spoke to him, came and testified about the odd conversation she had had with William about Maria at harvest time. And she further remembered now that William had borrowed a shovel from her around the time that Maria went missing.
What?
Yeah. The man that William had said had been working in the field that day also came to testify and denied that he had ever been hired by William at that time. The prosecution made the case that William had, in cold blood, lured Maria to the barn and killed her so that he would not have to marry her. They painted the picture of how he had shot and stabbed the poor woman and then covered up his deeds by gaslighting everyone into thinking that the two had been married and that Maria was living happily somewhere else. It was a pretty easy theory to prove with the letters that he had written and the overzealous investigation team creating explanations for all their findings. The prosecution, who was also the coroner, used the injuries he had found to fit his case. But the story he told was a believable one, especially since it was the story that the gossipers had been saying all along. William, during the trial, started to come clean. While representing himself with some assistance, he explained the sequence of events to the jury over a 30-minute monologue. He began with the injustice that he was facing during the trial. And I have to admit, by our standards today, there would have been a mistrial. The coroner was also the prosecutor.
Yeah.
The jury was well aware of all the gossip prior to the trial, and all of that gossip presented him as being guilty. And he had not been given access to any of the dispositions or the witness statements or evidence that was collected against him.
Oh.
Yeah.
Was that typical for that time, or that just happened in this case?
Well, it was court in 1828, so there weren't any rules for any of that. But had it been held today, he would have gotten a mistrial. Not that he wasn't guilty, but he would have gotten a mistrial. After going on about the unfair treatment that he had received because of the excitement surrounding the trial, William admitted that he had covered up Maria's death, but not that he had killed her. He and Maria had taken up residence in Sudbury to conceal the pregnancy after their affair from his mother. He admitted all that. When the child died, it was a decision made between Maria and himself that the child would be buried in a field to avoid the charges at the time that could result from a child being born out of wedlock. He told the jury that he had purchased 2 pistols, but that Maria had taken them from him, and that he had had reason to suspect that Maria was carrying on with another man in London.
Oh, please.
He told the jury, quote, "Though her conduct was not free from blemish, I at length yielded to her entreaties and agreed to marry her." He agreed with the witnesses' statements that they had been arguing when they left, and that Maria was crying when she left her home that morning. He said that when they reached the barn, he had rebuked her for her emotions, and while she was changing into her dress, she, quote, "flew into a passion, upbraided me with not having so much regard for her as the gentleman before alluded to. Feeling myself in the manner so much insulted and irritated, when I was about to perform every kindness and reparation, I said, 'Maria, if you go on this way before marriage, what have I to expect after? I shall therefore stop when I can. I will return straight home, and you can do what you like and act just like you think is proper.' I said I would not marry her, and in consequence of this, I retired from her. I had retired from her when I immediately heard report of a gun or a pistol, and running back, I found the unhappy girl weltering on the ground. Recovering from my stupor, I thought to have left the spot, but I endeavored to raise her from the ground, but found her lifeless. To my honor, I discovered the pistol was one of my own that she had privately taken from my bedroom. There she lay, killed by one of my own pistols, and I, the only being by. My faculties were suspended. I knew not what to do. He was adamant that Maria had shot herself and said that he had had no idea of any other injuries that had occurred to her body, but suggested that they were made by the coroner/prosecutor trying to frame him, or that the injuries had been made while they were removing her body. He said that he had buried her using a shovel that he had borrowed from Mrs. Stowe and then tried to conceal her death through lies and letters. But he concluded his speech to the jury by saying that he wasn't being overly sneaky. William, for his own defense, tried to point out that he had not fled, that he had lived with his mother for months after, and that he hadn't hidden his departure from Polstead, that he had actively advertised in the newspaper, the Times, the sale of his house, and given his full name and address. He's saying that I didn't hide. I just did what I did.
I just lied to everyone and said we were married or getting married.
Yeah.
And said she was fine.
That's all I did.
But I was being honorable and forthright.
Just like you, the jury wasn't buying his side of events. To claim that Maria had committed suicide was viewed as him trying to further insult the victim, because suicide was a capital offense and was condemned by the church. After only a 2-day trial, William was found guilty after only 35 minutes of deliberation and sentenced to be hung and then publicly anatomized in the town's Shire Hall. While the judge read the sentence, William was observed to shake uncontrollably and had at times had to be held up by the jailer.
Wow.
He was taken back to prison to await his death that was scheduled for the following Monday.
Oh, they're not messing around.
No, not at all. On August 10th, 1828, after a lot of convincing from his wife Mary, the prison warden, and the clergyman, William wrote his final confession in an attempt to make peace with God. He wrote that the couple had quarreled about the burial of their child and other subjects for about 45 minutes, and then there was a scuffle. During the scuffle, he took a pistol from the side pocket of his velveteen jacket and fired. He said she fell and died instantly. He recalled the blood running through the floor and being stunned. After about 2 hours, he determined that the body had to be buried, so he went to borrow a spade from Mrs. Stowe, whose house was closer than his own. The shovel had been a bad one that he had borrowed, so he had to still go home and get a pickaxe and a better shovel. He moved the body with the handkerchief tied around her neck into a hole that he had dug and covered it up and washed the floor of the barn. He denied in his final confession that he had ever stabbed her. When asked for more details, he refused to comment.
We knew he was guilty. And little George was right. He did see him with the pickaxe.
Yep.
And how lazy. He lives literally on a farm. And he's just going to go to the neighbor to borrow a shovel instead of going back to his place to get it.
Right.
Just shows how arrogant he was about the whole thing.
Or maybe he was concerned that somebody would find her before he got back to bury her.
True.
But there were all these stab marks on her body. And he said absolutely he did not do those. Maybe they were made from a pickaxe, or I was thinking they could possibly have been made by her father's mole pole.
Or while she was being exhumed.
Yeah.
Especially since they didn't see them the first time.
It is curious. Forensics was at the time just in its beginning stages, and there were a lot of inferences made after the fact by the prosecution who did have an ulterior motive for making all the pieces fit.
True.
So I kind of believe him that those stab wounds weren't there.
Because why confess to everything else?
Right.
And why would he have a sword with him out at the barn?
Yeah, I don't think he did.
No.
The other thing that I did find curious was that William talks about this other subject or this other thing being discussed. And I think that that was probably another man because of the comment he made to Mrs. Stowe about nobody else being able to see her.
So you think it was in a jealous rage?
I think there was something about it. Yeah. And I think that's probably why she was stalling marrying him, is that she had another beau lined up.
Oh, that could be. maybe waiting to see if that would work out better.
Yeah, I think there is this kind of jealous tone to this case.
Wow, that is interesting.
On August 11th, a weak-kneed William Corder stepped out onto the gallows at 10 minutes to noon. The gallows had to be specially constructed for him. Not because he was tall, he was barely over 5 feet, but because the hanging tree that was customarily used would not allow for the crowds that had gathered to get a good view of his sentence.
Oh my goodness. I guess if women were literally tearing the building apart to get in there.
Yeah, thousands of people gathered to see him hung.
It's just so wild.
It is. By the time of the hanging, the tale of the Red Barn murder had swept beyond England. Numerous plays, novels, and tabloid-style newspapers chronicled the events. Charles Dickens reluctantly even included the story in his magazine all the year round. To allow for viewing, a hole was dug just outside the jail, and then a platform was built that attached to an opening they created in the side of the jail. Immediately after the hanging, William's body was carried back to the prison. The crowd clamored for pieces of the hanging rope, which sounds like it was a typical souvenir during infamous executions at the time. Fascination with true crime just isn't something new.
No, that's still today. People go to crime scenes or murder houses to take items.
But it was happening way back then.
Yeah.
Like, it's not something new. An hour after William Corder's death, the county surgeon, George Creed, was already slicing a long line down the center of his body, peeling back the skin to expose the chest muscles before laying the body out for the public to see.
Really?
At the time, it was to act as a deterrent for future murderers.
I think it would work.
Yeah. Artists came that day and made death masks and phrenological plaster casts of William's head. There was money to be made from his death. The hangman collected what remained of his fine clothes and sold them off. The next day, medical students and anatomists from Cambridge fully dissected William's body. It is believed that this is when Dr. Creed removed a sizable piece of his skin that he would later then use to bind a book about this trial.
No way.
Yes, you heard that right. The book was originally kept in the doctor's personal collection until after his death, and then it was given to a public museum. And this is the book that had the details where I researched this case.
He went full on Ed Gein.
Yes.
And made a book out of skin.
And it was wrapped in a reporter's recollections of the trial. That's how we know what happened in this trial. From a book that was wrapped in the murderer's skin.
That is incredible, Melissa.
Isn't that wild?
Totally against the law now, you guys. Don't do it. But holy cow.
Yeah. Dr. Creed also made an anatomical wet specimen out of William's heart and prepared his skeleton for eventual articulation and display at a hospital where it would remain until it pretty much disintegrated. William's brain and skull were examined by many professionals of the day. Phrenology was a popular pseudoscience at the time. It was a science that examined the bumps on the head, and believers thought that those bumps could be used to understand a person's personality and behaviors. Various claims were made from William's dissections about him. It was concluded that he must have been a man of low self-esteem and inferior intellect, but that he had an oversized region of marvelousness and inclination toward religiosity and superstition. And it was also noted that the skull was developed in the areas of secretiveness, acquisitiveness, destructiveness, and a lack of benevolence. William's body and several artifacts of evidence from the case have been preserved in museums, while others, like Maria's tombstone and the Red Barn, have succumbed to murder tourism. There's very little that's left of either one of those.
Aw, that's sad about her tomb.
And that is the case of the spoiled and jealous, sniveling dirtbag William Corder, who was brought down by the poorly understood supernatural connection between the living and the dead.
That was amazing.
I thought you would like that for spooky season.
Yeah, I really did. Not that I'm excited that this happened to Maria. That is horrible. But just how this all transpired and that she visited her stepmom. She didn't even go to her dad. She went to her stepmom, which I just think is amazing.
It is interesting that you pointed that out about her personality. It sounded like that would have totally been her.
Absolutely it would have. And that's why I don't believe she would have killed herself either. Because she was saying to him, if I go down, you're coming with me.
No, I don't believe that at all. And even the judge, when he was giving the admonition to the jury, he talked about William's claims that Maria had killed herself. And he said, most women would either poison or hang themselves. They're not going to shoot and stab themselves.
Absolutely not.
Like, he pointed out the ridiculousness of that claim. It was definitely William the dirtbag.
It was. And now they're both in the afterlife, and I wonder if Maria's on his case. I wonder if you can haunt another spirit.
That would be amazing. William's wife did say that after they were married, he did have restless nights where he was haunted.
I hope she haunted him. I hope she still is. She's chasing him around out somewhere. In a red barn.
That would be fitting for him, but I hope no ghosts are going to haunt us.
Yeah, no thank you. But speaking of haunting, I do have a haunting case to tell you next week. So I hope you guys will join us for that one.
Until then,
see ya.
Bye.
All right. Testing.
It has been a crazy morning.
It really has.
Technology has not been our friend.
Nope. Might have to rough it up a little bit.
Gonna be amazing.
Melissa's taking booby shots.
I am.
You can interpret that however you want.
Ever had one of those days where you just need to wear that shirt? It's fine. I'm fine. Everything is fine. Why don't you just record us 24/7?
Okay, it's recording.
You always say the craziest things when we're not recording.
I know.
You're like, oh, that sounded really smart. Dang it. You weren't recording.
Sorry. But then sometimes I record us saying things we shouldn't be saying, and we don't want anyone to ever hear.
That is true. And her upper jaw.
Her upper jaw?
Sorry, she was.
What?
Let me read this again.
Picture that I just got.
She wasn't missing her whole upper
just
jaw.
The bottom jaw. And no upper jaw. Like,
she was
her lips wouldn't even stay out.
She was missing a tooth from her upper jaw and her lower jaw. So 2 teeth were gone.
I was like, how is she attracting all these men?
Why do I make such long sentences? That's right.
Okay. I was a little concerned for a moment.
You never know what happened back then.
No. That's what happens now.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm going to try and get my act together, but oh my gosh, my brain today.
Okay.
Maybe it's called a when because you look in the mirror and you're like, when did I get this double chin?
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.